There's a neighborhood in southern China that most people have never heard of, where roughly 300,000 people go to work every single day making clothes. Locals call it Shein Village, and for a few years, it was the most efficient clothing machine ever built. Around 5,000 factories packed into a few square kilometers, capable of turning a design into a finished garment on your doorstep in as little as 72 hours. You've probably bought something that came from here. Almost everyone has. And the obvious question is the one nobody really answers. How is any of this physically possible at these prices? The answer isn't sweatshops in the way you're imagining. It's a machine, one built from about 4 specific mechanisms. And here's what makes this story worth your time. That machine just broke. Let me show you how it worked and what happened when someone finally pulled the plug. To understand this, you have to understand that Shein Village isn't a factory. It's a neighborhood. Panyu District in Guangzhou was already one of China's biggest garment hubs long before Shein existed. Roughly 5,000 workshops, ranging from proper factories with assembly lines to family-run operations squeezed into the floors of ordinary apartment buildings. Somewhere north of 500 of them are core Shein suppliers, with around 1,000 smaller workshops acting as subcontractors underneath them. And it doesn't look like what you'd expect. There's no giant industrial complex. There are narrow streets, 4-story buildings with a different workshop on every floor, and job ads plastered over every available wall. Factories put their best-selling items right out on the street so passing workers can inspect the stitching and compare rates before deciding where to work that day. That last detail is the important one, and it's easy to miss. Workers aren't choosing an employer. They're choosing a price because almost nobody here is paid a salary. They're paid per piece. That single fact is the foundation the entire machine is built on, and everything else follows from it. Because piece rate work is what allows the whole village to behave like one enormous flexible organism. It can scale up overnight when something goes viral and go quiet the next day with no fixed cost to anyone at the top. So how does a system like that actually run? It runs on 4 mechanisms, and the first one is the one Shein is famous for. Mechanism 1, never guess. Traditional fashion brands guess. They design a collection months ahead, manufacture tens of thousands of units, and pray people buy it. When they guess wrong, they eat the loss. Shein's model does the opposite. It's called small batch, quick response. Send 100 units of a design, see what happens. If it dies, you lost almost nothing. If it goes viral, the order comes back multiplied and the village has to produce it now. That's how you get from design to shelf in about 72 hours. That's genuinely impressive engineering, but it means the risk doesn't disappear, it just gets pushed downward, onto the workshops that have to absorb the chaos of never knowing what tomorrow looks like. Which brings us to mechanism 2, the squeeze. Here's the part that surprised me most. You'd assume the factories are the ones profiting from cheap labor. They're barely profiting at all. According to people who work with Shein suppliers, a typical supplier makes around 10 to 20% margin. While cross-border e-commerce generally needs closer to 50% to be genuinely viable, because shipping risk overseas can cost more than the products themselves. And it gets tighter. Shein's pricing team hands suppliers a suggested selling price, sometimes below what the item actually costs to make. One factory owner described the cycle plainly. When a product sells well, Shein comes back and asks for a lower price. Say no, and a few days later the identical item appears on the platform cheaper, made by someone else. Her words stuck with me. She said she's the one holding the inventory, she's the one rushing the orders, she's already giving her lowest price, and they still want it cut in half. So the factories are squeezed to almost nothing, which raises the obvious question: if the platform sets the price and the factory can't absorb it, who actually pays? The answer is the person holding the needle. When a platform squeezes a factory and the factory has a 10% margin, there's only one variable left to adjust: the piece rate. And in Shein Village, most pieces reportedly pay somewhere between 3 and 12 cents. Read that again. Cents, which means the only way to earn a living is volume, and volume means hours. Workers there describe days of roughly 12 to 13 hours, which lands around 80 hours a week. China's own legal limit is 40. And here's the detail that says everything. Inside these factories, Shein's own code of conduct is posted on the wall. It states that suppliers should arrange working hours reasonably and comply with local law. The rule and the reality are hanging in the same room. Now, Shein's defense is that the pay is competitive. They've published figures claiming supply chain wages run 40 to 75% above the local average. And maybe that's true on paper, but in my opinion, a wage number without the hours attached isn't a wage number at all. Earning more than average by working double the legal maximum isn't competitive pay, it's just more hours. And this isn't only a factory floor thing. 2 kilometers from the village sits Shein's headquarters, where office staff have operated under what's known internally as the 242 rule, an expectation of at least 242 working hours a month. That's roughly 8 hours a day, every single day with no days off, and that number was later raised to 264. On former employee put it about as bluntly as you can. They didn't expect to get rich working those hours, they said, and they weren't born to work like an ox. So that's 3 mechanisms. Never guess, squeeze the supplier, and let the hours absorb the difference. But none of it would have reached America at $5 a shirt without the 4th, and the 4th one isn't in China at all. The 4th mechanism was a line in American customs law called de minimis. The rule was simple, and for most of its life, sensible. Any shipment worth under $800 could enter the United States without tariffs and without formal customs processing. It was created so customs officers wouldn't drown in paperwork over trivial parcels. The threshold started at $1 back in 1938. By 2015, it had been raised to $800. And that rule is the actual reason your $5 shirt was $5. Because it meant a package could travel from a workshop floor in Panyu straight to a doorstep in Ohio without ever being taxed like an import. Not a container of goods clearing customs, a single parcel, invisible to the system. The scale it reached is hard to picture. Before the rule was changed, an estimated 4 million packages a day were entering the United States under de minimis. Well, over 1 billion a year. Shein and Temu together likely accounted for close to 1/3 of them. This is why every complaint about cheap Chinese goods was aimed at the wrong thing. The clothes weren't cheap only because of the labor. They were cheap because the labor was squeezed, and the finished product skipped the tax that every domestic competitor had to pay. An American company making shirts in America paid duties on its supply chain. A parcel from Panyu paid nothing. That was the 4th leg of the machine, and it was the one holding all the weight. So in 2025, the American government kicked it out. In May, de minimis ended for China and Hong Kong. By August, it was suspended for every country on Earth. And what happened next is the part none of the reporting from inside those villages could have shown you, because it hadn't happened yet. The village started going quiet. Within about 2 months of the change, one workshop owner in Panyu described it simply, places had closed all over the place. In one 4-story building, roughly half of the 20-odd Shein suppliers operating there had shut down. Half-finished clothing was left abandoned inside empty units. One factory owner who'd supplied Shein for 5 years said his orders dropped by 50% in a single year. Another described the mood across the district in one word, glum. And Shein's response was to push suppliers to relocate to Vietnam, which is a real solution if you're a large supplier with capital, and no solution at all if you're a family workshop on the 3rd floor of an apartment building. Most of them simply can't move, so they close. And this is where the story gets genuinely uncomfortable, because there's no clean villain to point at. The workers in that village were not there because it was a good deal. They were there because it was the deal available. And the same weak labor protections that let the hours get that long also meant no contracts, no social insurance, and no cushion when the orders stopped. Many of them were migrants from other provinces. Now the anxiety isn't the 13-hour shift, it's whether there's a shift at all tomorrow. Meanwhile, on the other end, the loophole closing hasn't made American manufacturing suddenly competitive. Prices went up. Small US businesses that sourced inventory abroad got hit too. As one trade expert put it, the packages won't stop, they'll just be routed differently, and the cost lands on the consumer. Which means the machine didn't get fixed, it got moved. Here's what I keep coming back to. For a decade, 3 groups all wanted the exact same thing at the same time. American consumers wanted clothes that cost less than lunch. Platforms wanted a supply chain fast enough to sell trends before they died, and local governments wanted the economic growth those factories generated. Every one of those interests was rational on its own. Together, they built a system where a person earns cents per garment, works 80 hours a week, and has no contract, and where the finished product crosses an ocean without paying a cent in tax. Nobody designed that outcome. It was just what happened when 3 forces pulled in the same direction with nothing standing in the way. And the uncomfortable truth is that closing one loophole didn't undo it. Shein Village is emptying out, but the demand that built it hasn't gone anywhere. It's already looking for its next village, in Vietnam or somewhere else that hasn't been named yet. And in a few years, someone will make a video about that place too. Japan was first, Korea is second, America is next. Subscribe for more.